How's it going, everyone? It's Carpo here. I'm not really sure how to even tackle this particular video. I thought about it for a couple days, and I thought maybe I'd do a recording or some different format, but I decided I'm just going to go ahead and make it, because if I don't, I probably never will. It's a subject that I hate talking about, which is war, and in particular, this is about the Afghanistan war and what it's actually cost us in terms of people and profits and future and trust, which are all important issues. The reason why I'm talking about this, I'd like to get that out of the way right away. I'm speaking for those with no voice, and I'm speaking for the fact that in the last 2 years, the Afghanistan war doesn't even make it into the top 10 news stories. And it's pretty shameful when soldiers are still dying and when civilians are still dying. A lot of people tend to think this war was kind of wrapped up in the last few years. There were a lot of complaints about how Obama was continuing to bomb over there, and I completely agree that it went too far. But in the first part of 2018, the Trump administration actually did more bombings, and there were more civilian casualties than any of the previous 18 years. So it's not ending by any means. In fact, right now the Taliban are trying to, well, I should say the US is asking for peace talks with the Taliban. Now think about this for a minute. Back up. You know, I know a lot of you might be younger and you don't remember what back in 2001 and 2 when we first went in to Iraq, and how this was considered the Iraq War, which quickly became the Afghanistan War. The sad thing is that the only winners in the whole thing was Iran. So I'd like to give you a few numbers and a few statistics to kind of put it in perspective. Over the first few years of the war, the total cost of the war was about 1/5 of our total expenditures from the nation. It's a ridiculous amount of money. But when I give you the number for how much they believe we've actually spent, let me just start out with what they told us it would cost. George Bush told us it would cost about $1.7 billion, which is a huge amount of money. Well, one of his generals, or one of the military members, came out and said that he said it was going to be more like $100 billion. And because of this, George Bush said that that's ridiculous, it will never cost that much. And from what I understand, the guy was actually fired for saying that, for his claim that it would cost $100 billion. Well, the total costs now are estimated to be upwards of $4 to $6 trillion, which is, what, 60 times what the high guess was? 60 times more. But 1,000 times more than what it was told. We were told 6,000 times more than what we were told it would be. And this is just a money fact. I'm only pointing this out because the loss in life and the loss in trust is so much more. But with our nation complaining about how we can't afford health care and how we can't afford to fix our roads, we can't afford our infrastructure, and then we want to blame immigrants, it's a bunch of bullshit. People need to really look at the numbers and see where the money's going. So how much does this total cost? When you talk about $6 trillion, the average American can't even contemplate how much that really is. Well, it comes out to $4 million per hour. So by the time I'm done with this video, we will have spent $2 million. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but in a half an hour, that's quite a bit of money. And there are plenty of other programs in this nation that we could be spending them on. Now, I would like to say this. If the cost of war is worth it, and anyone out there says, well, this was something we had to do, I would ask you, what did we win? Do you feel safer? Is terrorism any better than it was before, or is it worse? It takes a long time for somebody to admit they made a mistake when it's a big mistake. It took America 40 years to admit that we fucked up going into Vietnam. But we all know it's true now. And they fought to keep all the costs and all the damage to the soldiers quiet for decades. But now that a whole new generation has grown up and don't know anything about Vietnam, well, now they can let it out, reveal all the secrets. And guess what? In 20 years, when all the soldiers are coming down with a variety of illnesses and diseases for being exposed to the chromium and the burn pits over there, we'll be paying. Our children will be paying for our mistakes. And that's bullshit. The future cost will be a huge amount. And the thing is, when they talk about the cost of war, they don't include all the expenditures that were wasted, all the funds that were wasted, all the corruption and greed. And so let's talk about how many troops were killed. Talk about 7,000 U.S. troops. When you compare that to how many people died in, say, Vietnam, it doesn't seem like very much. But this is 7,000 people. Close your eyes and picture 7,000 people all being slaughtered. Young boys and girls who went over there to fight for their country and end up dying on the battlefield for no purpose whatsoever that I can see. Now, 7,000 troops doesn't sound like much, but 147,000 total dead, that's quite a bit. And 38,000 dead civilians. These are mothers, daughters, sons, grandparents, people who are just trying to live their lives. And in the end, we've destroyed so many roads, so many bridges, that they can't even go on with their normal life. And it was all to bring democracy. They guess that about 1.5 million troops are going to need treatment upon retiring from the military because of their time in Afghanistan. 250,000 troops with head or brain trauma. And one thing that I found pretty disturbing is that many of the commanders were penalized for trying to improvise to help their soldiers. We know they weren't given proper gear. Anybody who watched the media back then, when they were talking about it, knows that the soldiers were complaining because they didn't have enough vests. They didn't have enough armor. They didn't have enough ammunition. And now the stories that are coming out from the soldiers themselves, you can see it all plainly. And back then I felt like it was pointless to even talk against the war, because all these gung-ho guys who were all for the war, they're the same ones who never went out and fought. They're the ones who never joined the forces. They're the ones who want to talk big about how great the military is. Nobody I've talked to who went over there says it was a great thing. And that brings to mind an important point, which is that when we're, as humans, doing something, we want to think that what we're doing is important. And if we go over and we fight for a cause and we realize that there was no real cause or no real reason to be there, that's heartbreaking. And an individual is going to do, many people will do anything they can to justify their position and what they did. But many more, realize that it was just an error in judgment, and they come back frustrated. Not only frustrated at their leaders for sending them over there, but at the VA, and it's not even the VA's fault, it's the lack of funding. There are a lot of administrations that want to help veterans, but where's the funding to help these people? When we're spending $6 trillion, why can't we get $1 trillion to help the damn soldiers? If we didn't go over there in the first place, we wouldn't need to, but we did. So, I think back in the past when we had wars, the reason why Americans would speak up more was because there was a war tax during World War I and World War II. Sometimes up to 80 to 90% of income was put to war tax. And when the people knew they were putting money into the war, they were aware the war was going on. But things changed after Vietnam. After Desert Storm, we began using civilian contractors for the military. This took the brunt of the blame off of the military themselves, but it also meant that we needed to be more hush-hush. We didn't need the public funds anymore. We could just take the tax dollars and use it and funnel it into these other corporations, which made billions of dollars. Think about this. Dick Cheney, Halliburton. Dick Cheney was the vice president when we went over there, and it was his company that went in there and profited the most. If you don't see that as a conflict of interest, then I don't know what else to say about it. But there was a lot of wasted money and a lot of wasted lives, I'll just say that. There was one particular road that was being built which cost $5 million per mile to build because they needed so many security forces just to protect the people who were building the road. It ended up costing $3 billion total for this road, and it was never finished. It's completely unusable. and there is just equipment sitting over there that they're just going to sell for pennies on the dollar because it was never used. And that all came out of your pockets. One other thing which I found interesting is for all the talk about heroin coming out of Afghanistan, a lot of folks don't realize that it was U.S. soldiers who were stationed to protect poppy fields for heroin production for the U.S. drug market, or I should say, maybe not heroin production, you could just say OxyContin production. However you want to put it, heroin production doubled over that time. And I don't know what else to say about that. When we talk about it being such a problem, then that's obviously not an issue for us. If you just Google U.S. troops protecting poppy fields, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Which I'm not saying is a good or a bad thing, but if you're using heroin as a reason why they're a problem, then that's an illegitimate excuse. We wanted it for our own pharmaceutical companies, and how interesting how we just, all of a sudden, all these opiates flood the market. There's more heroin than ever, that's all I can say, and more chaos than ever. Invading other countries creates a breeding ground for terrorism. In other words, trying to get people to join your anger against the West, if the West has nothing to do with your country, is going to be a little harder. But if there's coalition bombers flying over your neighborhood and they killed your kids, then you're probably going to join up and have a different outlook. Therefore, fighting terrorism through the military will never be successful. I firmly believe that. I don't think that we can ever stop it. They tried to do the same thing with guerrilla warfare in Vietnam, ended up slaughtering all the innocent people because they didn't know who the enemy was. That's the world we live in now. We're not sitting in red and blue coats, standing up saying, all right, fire, you know. That was idiot warfare. I mean, I don't understand why people can't see that guerrilla warfare cannot be beaten through conventional military means. No amount of tanks or bombers or surgical strikes are going to stop it, because it doesn't breed in one place. It comes out of the anguish and frustration of losing your people and having your country invaded. So you're naturally going to continue to breed more people that hate America, and then America will continue to attack. And so I'd like to also say to all the politicians, to anybody who is pro-war or anybody who, you know, supports the military no matter what they do and says, you know, we have to protect America, please stop using 9/11 as an excuse or a reason for going in there. Everyone I've ever heard on any, you know, news show or interviews who's defending us going over there says, don't forget 9/11. Look, we don't. We won't. We remember 9/11. We also remember when bin Laden was supposedly captured and then dumped off of a ship in the middle of the ocean, and everybody was suspicious, saying, you know, really, this is the guy that attacked America, and you're going to respect their religious wishes rather than bringing his body back so everybody can confirm it was him? Was it ever bin Laden? And then all these conspiracies come up. Did stopping bin Laden do anything? No, of course not. So I'm not saying that there was nothing solved, or that there was no, well, I don't think anything was solved. I should say I think that there were a lot of good intentioned actions trying to stop terrorist organizations, and which could have been much worse without intervention. But would they have existed and had such power if we hadn't created a vacuum for them, a power vacuum for them to take over? Because without U.S. and coalition troops attacking many of these places, you know, these guys never would have been able to move into town. There are plenty of people over there who also hate bin Laden and hate the same groups that we hate. And it's not like everybody over there is a terrorist, but that's the image they want to give, because it makes it easier to blow up children. And you know, that sounds harsh, but it's true. It's the reality. If you've seen enough pictures of bloody, dead, maimed kids laying on the road in the Middle East, then, you know, there's no real excuse for war that you can justify at all. So they like to play on the emotions of people, and they like to say, well, if you don't support this, then you must be anti-soldier. And back then, in the early 2000s, that's the game they were playing. Well, if you don't support our troops, well, you just get out of this country. My thought was always to those people was, shame on you. You're not the real American. Because you're not supporting the troops. You're supporting a war you don't understand. I support the troops by saying, bring the fucking guys home, you know? We don't need to be out there fighting on all these fronts. And if you look back historically through all the wars we've fought, I'd be curious to hear when we've actually succeeded going overseas and attacking other countries. Some people would say World War II. I would say I have my own opinions on that one. But the fact that it's out of sight, out of mind, and the media won't talk about it is pretty disparaging. But that's the way it's always been. In the end, we just need to listen to history. It's a failure of reason to think that we're ever going to win this war. And my opinion is that we need to get the hell out of Afghanistan now, cut our losses, and move forward. You know, walk away with our tail between our legs, because that's what we have to do. Because America being strong no longer means showing our might. Everybody knew the tough guy in school, right? The bully who nobody messed with, who always got his way, because if you mess with him, he'll kick your ass. Where's that guy now? Now that he's left high school? Is he that lonely, pathetic guy that doesn't have any friends? You know, and that's where America's going. If we don't take care of ourselves. Now, I'm not dismissing America as a bad place. I'm not saying it's that we're a bad nation. The American people are amazing. And the nation that I live in and the people that I know, they're creative, they're insightful, but there's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings, and most of that is brought through the propaganda and the media. But, you know, when I was younger, it was, the commercials would come on, be all you can be, find your future in the Army. And that was about the time when they started basically saying, well, we can't get anybody to join for the sake of fighting, because the last war we completely screwed up, so let's say we'll give them some college, you know, give them some college, snooze, almost time to go. Give them some free college and you know, get them to fight on the front line, so if they make it home, they can go to college. And then what happened is, later on, in the late 2000s, these commercials started coming out. Around the last time I watched TV, which just had heavy metal in the background, a bunch of young guys in tanks rolling through, playing heavy metal music, going, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, they wanted to make it look like, take your anger out in the Army. I don't even know what they were trying to come across as, but the idea is that any country that has something worth fighting for should be able to convince its people to do so without having to delude them into thinking they're going to be either super powerful, be able to take their aggressions out, or actually find their future in the Army. And there are enough young kids who fell into that. I have a friend that I grew up with who I hadn't seen for years, and he went over there and he was stationed in Iraq, and the last time I saw him, he was just a different person. And he said that he was a gunner on a Humvee, and they hid an IED in a roadside sabotage, or roadside, basically they annihilated his whole unit in front of him, and he was the only one that survived. And I think, man, ruined for life. You made it home alive, but your soul is dead. How can you ever make it out of something like that? Back in World War I, they called it shell shock. They didn't even understand what it was. And now it's well known as PTSD, which comes from many different forms, but humans weren't meant to fight on a battlefield. And the fact that we have so much of it done through computers, and if you think that a guy sitting behind a computer in the US controlling a drone is any better, it's not, because they also have PTSD. People who know what they've done, even if it's not directly, and they're not directly involved. It takes the humanity out of it, but it doesn't take the anxiety away from what we've done. So I hope I've covered some basic premises of the war here, given my opinion on why I think it was a complete waste of time. And I'd really be curious to hear anybody who has an alternative point of view, who thinks that this was important, that us spending almost 20 years in Afghanistan has been a productive route. And if so, please explain yourself in full as to what we have gained from this, beyond corporate profits and more money for these fighter jets and companies and making weapons, and it's the military-industrial complex that profited on this, not the people. Talk to you soon. Be well.